This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Economist James K. Galbraith talks about the mania on the right about cutting Social Security and Medicare, which he says will only further weaken the purchasing power of the elderly. Gas prices are going through the roof, and Steven Coll, president of the New America Foundation, has written a book exposing how Exxon Mobil determines both the price of gasoline and U.S. foreign policy. And Bill Press talks with an expert on the Chinese hacking of America. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. James K. Galbraith, a world-famous economist, sheds some light for us about the effects of any cuts in Medicare or Social Security. And he makes the case for a minimum wage of $12 an hour. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, James K. Galbraith holds the Lloyd M. Benson Jr. Chair of Government Business Relations at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs, the University of Texas at Austin. He is a senior scholar with the Levy Economics Institute and chair of the Board of Economists for Peace and Security, an international association of professional economists. James Galbraith, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Good to be with you, as always.
Yeah, always nice to speak with you, too. And, you know, as we start a new year and a series of fiscal deadlines, what's your prognosis for the U.S. economy, short-term and long-term?
Well, I'm by habit and inclination pessimistic, and I don't see any reason to break that habit on the evidence that's in front of us now. Basically, the U.S. economy is stable. It's not likely to experience another dramatic collapse and panic unless something that I can't immediately foresee happens in the financial sector. But there are no strong forces tending to produce higher rates of growth. And there are a great many political forces, including the resolution of this so-called fiscal cliff that we've just seen, that will slow things down relative to what they would otherwise have been. Most specifically, over the course of the year, the expiration of the payroll tax holiday, which is adding a couple of percentage points of income to every working person's tax bill, is going to slow down the consumption expenditures. So I don't see any reason for let's say, any particular optimism.
Mm-hmm. The fact that the president, quote unquote, has the upper hand, does and maybe it's not just policy issues. I mean, what needs to happen to get the American economy to where it's not just stable but solid and actually growing at a good clip again?
The most important thing is a change of ideas and understanding about the role that our core social insurance programs play. They were Social Security, also Medicare, Medicaid, and other unemployment insurance, played an extraordinarily valuable role in the crisis in maintaining people's incomes, even though they may have lost their jobs or been forced to retire earlier than they would have. And the result of that was, in fact, the stabilization of the economy as a whole. We are, however, in the grip of a mania, which holds that these programs are unaffordable and must be cut. And if we succumb to that mania, if we go along with the people who have been making this case, who have, by and large, have been the political enemies of Social Security and Medicare since their inception, then the economy will weaken because the purchasing power of a key part of the population will be stressed even more. And so, to me, that's the crucial change. It's a change which needs to begin in the White House, maybe with a change of personnel, but if not with that, with a change of ideas, so that we can get away from the idea that the way forward lies with compromising with people who would cut, undermine, ultimately erode Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other essential programs.
At the beginning of the year, amidst all the talk about taxes and spending cuts, a number of states have raised their minimum wage. Will that have any real effect on the economy?
I'm not sure exactly how significant the actions that states have already taken will be, but in general, raising the minimum wage is a useful way to raise the income of low-income workers, and that, again, stabilizes their consumption, their spending and consumption, so it's good for the economy. I have advocated, and I'm joined in this, by the way, by the publisher of a magazine called The American Conservative, so you can call this a bipartisan, multi-ideological proposal, but I have argued that we should be raising the national minimum wage by quite a lot, well, let's say to $12 an hour, with a view of transforming the low end of the labor force of the workforce in the United States and giving them a much more stable income base than they've got now. In the state of Texas, for example, the median wage for construction workers is $10 an hour. That is a very low rate for that kind of work, and the only way to get it up is for the federal government to set a standard, which then private enterprises will conform to. Some private businesses would have to cut back on their employment, or think they might in the course of that. But the reality is that what they lose on the cost side, they make back in revenues, people coming through the door with more money to spend. We have experience of that recently in the United Kingdom, which introduced a minimum wage in 1999, has raised it considerably since then. No bad employment effects at all. And in fact, the issue has become basically uncontroversial in the UK. Even conservatives have recognized that this is a good policy, which the economists who were crying wolf about it were simply wrong.
We're speaking with James Galbraith, professor of economics, University of Texas at Austin, also senior scholar with the Levy Economics Institute. Will the compromise on the amount of the Bush tax cut extension on the middle class and the increased rates for the very top earners really make a difference to the long-term deficit? Will it make any difference to the well-being of most Americans?
Increasingly, tax rates on the very wealthy is, in my view, a good idea, but I don't think it had any significant effect on economic outcomes, frankly. The reason for the stated reason for deficit reduction as a policy usually has to do with easing credit conditions and lowering interest rates. But the reality is that the base rate on federal funds, the interest rate that the government actually has some leverage over, is already zero practically. And so there's not much more that can be done on that grounds. And the further reality is that the rates that private parties have to pay, that corporations have to pay, that small businesses have to pay, that households have to pay on mortgages are much higher, not because there's a shortage of credit, but because the risk environment is seen by lenders to be much worse than it was, and that's also not going to be helped by this. So, as I say, I have no real objection to I would have had no objection to the full expiration of the Bush tax cuts on the very wealthy, no objection to the rise that occurred already as a result of the fiscal cliff deal. But the notion that this is somehow a significant positive effect on economic performance, it seems to me to be unfounded.
Will Democrats have to yield more than progressives would like when it comes to any adjustments in Social Security and or Medicare?
Democrats should not yield at all on this. And I think we should be relying on the leadership in the Senate, which I think does hold a fairly strong views and has been bolstered by the arrival of new progressive senators in Wisconsin, Massachusetts, and some other places, to hold the line on these issues. I think it was a good thing that the proposed cuts in Medicare, raising the retirement age, which is basically partial privatization, changing the cost of living adjustment in Social Security, which is a way of squeezing the very old, that these things didn't happen as part of the fiscal cliff deal, and they shouldn't happen as part of the debt ceiling resolution either. And it should be very clear that there is the progressive position, the Democratic position should be these matters are off the table. That it is wrong policy, counterproductive to consider them as the targets of some kind of a deficit deal. Sure, if you want to cut back on, let's say on corporate subsidies, you want to cut back on big agriculture, you want to cut the F-35 or other military programs, which even the Defense Department can't find a use for. Those are matters which you can fold into a negotiation and do some good while you are talking about the fiscal stance. But Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid is exactly the opposite situation.
Okay. Now, before we let you go, did the fiscal cliff fiasco and the looming debt ceiling debate plant seeds of doubt around the world about America's fiscal fitness? And
There's absolutely no evidence of that.
No, and
there's no evidence of that at all. You look at the interest rate that the U.S. government pays. That's the benchmark. If there were seeds of doubt, it would have gone up. It hasn't. So, and that on long-term Treasury bonds, it hasn't gone up. So there's no evidence that the world financial markets have the slightest concern that the U.S. government is actually going to default on its obligations or do something truly foolish. And in fact, we will see, I predict, that as the debt ceiling comes closer, that the markets again behave with the same basic confidence about the solidity of the government. That even if somehow the U.S. Treasury managed symbolically to delay the payment, the rolling over a Treasury bill or a coupon issue on a bond, or even if it delayed Social Security checks for a few weeks, which I hope it will never do, everybody recognizes that they're going to be made good in a very short period of time, that nobody faces or can face on U.S. government obligations the possibility of a permanent loss or a write-down. This is not going to be the situation of Argentina or Greece, where people are going to end up accepting some negotiated reduction to 70 cents or 50 cents on the dollar. Never going to happen, and everybody knows this. So what they will do is simply accrue the balances that they're owed and wait until the check comes in, which with perfect confidence that it will. And that, in that sense, what happens to private enterprises or to countries that don't control their currencies or that are indebted in other people's money does not, cannot, will not happen to the United States. The president can hold a tough position, quite confident that that's the case if he chooses to do so.
You said you were a pessimist earlier on, and that's the cheeriest answer I've heard from you so far. So I think maybe we leave it at that on a happy note from you, Professor Galbraith. I
guess I've been encouraged by my environment. As I talk to you from the middle of the Saguaro National Park, it's a really remarkably beautiful spot.
Lucky you, and I'm sure that has helped anyway. Professor, as always, we appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
My pleasure.
Enjoy. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Steven Coll has written a book about the influence of Exxon Mobil, whose executives, he says, feel no responsibility to any government. That's because presidents come and go, but Exxon goes on forever. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
When President Obama called for raising America's wage floor to $9 an hour, GOP House Leader John Boehner attacked it like a gator on a poodle. Incredibly, he claimed that raising the wages of our country's most poorly paid workers would hurt, guess who? America's most poorly paid workers. This disingenuous pitting of poor people against themselves is derived from a corporate manufactured myth that hiking the minimum forces small business owners to fire employees or even go bankrupt. When you raise the price of employment, he grumped, guess what happens? You get less of it. Well, guess again, John. That job killer fable has been debunked again and again by real-world experience. The pay floor has constantly been elevated by Congress, states, and cities, causing little to zero negative impacts on job numbers, but very positive results for employee morale, productivity, and turnover. It also generates a spending boost for local economies, especially for, guess who? Small businesses. Obviously, the major impact of the raise is to lift the incomes of about 18 million hardworking people in low-wage jobs, allowing them to make a down payment on a used car or enroll in a couple of community college classes. Plus, it gives at least a token nod to the essential need of bridging America's dangerously widening chasm of economic inequality. This is Jim Hightower saying the real shame in the Republican leader's attack is not his flagrant dishonesty, but the raw disdain it flings at low-wage workers, 60% of whom are women. The Boehners, Romneys, Koch brothers, and Wall Street billionaires see such people only in terms of their price tags, not in their value. That dehumanized contempt for the working class not only stains those who look down on the non-rich, but it's also holding back public policies to help America reach its full economic potential, and it is social dynamite.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Now, with gas prices on everyone's mind, we'll hear from Steven Coll, author of a book exposing how Exxon Mobil influences U.S. energy and foreign policy. He says that over the decades, the U.S. government has not achieved its energy objectives, but Exxon has. And we are joined today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, by Steve Coll, who's the president of New America Foundation, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, previously spent 20 years as a foreign correspondent and senior editor at the Washington Post, serving as the paper's managing editor from 1998 to 2004. He's the winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, the author of 7 books, and most recently the book Private Empire, Exxon Mobil, and American Power. Steve Coll, thanks for joining us again today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's always nice to talk to you. And, you know, in your book about the private empire that is Exxon Mobil, you document the political pull that the company has. Who does Exxon Mobil want to see in the White House, and what is the company doing to achieve its preference?
Well, they're a very Republican-oriented corporation, especially for such a broadly owned corporation that has its owners include government workers, pension funds in California, and teachers' pension funds in New York, and all kinds of diverse Americans. But the corporation's management is very much aligned with the Republican Party. The current chairman and chief executive and their chief political strategist have both given as individuals to the Romney campaign, and their pattern of spending in favor of the Republican Party, more than 90-10 split through their political action committee, is further evidence of that. They want a Republican administration in Washington, mostly because they want their oil and gas production in the United States to be deregulated.
How has the American involvement in Iraq affected Exxon? And has U.S. diplomacy ever been outsourced to companies like Exxon?
It's interesting, they really are an independent sovereign. They don't see themselves as subordinate to any government, including the government in Washington, even including the Bush administration. So in some respects, they oppose the Iraq war because their foreign policy is a stable, peaceful world that is friendly to property rights and oil drilling, and invading Iraq in the name of democracy didn't strike them as a way to promote that. And after the invasion, the Bush administration pressured them to go into Baghdad and open an office, and they said no. And yet later, after the surge, they went into Iraq at a time of their choosing, and immediately started bidding for oil properties. And today, they're the largest American oil corporation that owns oil and gas properties in Iraq. So the war ultimately led them to where they wanted to go, but on their timeline and on their terms. And now they are producing oil and owning oil in Iraq.
Mm. What was the relationship between Exxon leaders and Dick Cheney? Were there cases in which Exxon benefits from secret decisions made by the Bush administration?
There was a very close relationship between the Exxon chief executive, Lee Raymond, and Vice President Cheney. They were personal friends. They had lived together in the same neighborhood in Dallas when Cheney was the chief executive of Halliburton. Their families knew one another. They were social friends. So when Cheney became vice president, the chairman of Exxon had really quite a private line to the vice president and would go into Washington and meet with him one-on-one at the vice president's residence or just outside of official kind of lobbying circles. And from time to time, he would ask Cheney to make a call overseas when Exxon Mobil was bidding for a particular property, and he thought Cheney's influence with the head of state could help. In one case, in the United Arab Emirates, Cheney made a call that helped Exxon win an important oil field away from Shell with which it was competing.
And these types of things are done somewhat in secret, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, Cheney, of course, is the most secretive vice president we've had in a generation, and even within Exxon Mobil, I think a lot of their own Washington lobbyists working the normal channels of seeking meetings and making PowerPoint presentations, they weren't part of this private channel between Raymond and Cheney.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're speaking with Steve Coll, president of New America Foundation, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. His most recent book, Private Empire, Exxon Mobil and American Power. And Steve, you say in the book that Exxon's energy policy is America's energy policy. How so?
Well, they have more resources and a stronger, a sort of more consistent, disciplined view of what they're trying to achieve. And what they're trying to achieve is oil and gas primacy in our energy economy. And they have a long-term, very well-funded strategy to promote that business model. And I think they have demonstrated that they're more effective at achieving their sort of more oil and gas purism than presidents term limited by our Constitution, coming and going from Washington in complex political environments, have been in securing an alternative policy. Despite announcing since Nixon, every president has said, oh, we're going to end our dependence on imported oil. I'm going to promote alternative energy. And yet the record is, over that same 40 or plus years, Exxon Mobil has achieved its objectives, and a succession of American presidents have not achieved theirs.
What is it about Exxon's management methods that makes it so unique among Fortune 500 companies? I mean, there are plenty of those companies that are strictly aligned with Republicans, or for the most part are. I mean, so what is it about them that makes it so unique?
Some of it's their scale, $450 billion plus in revenue last year, which is, we've talked about is more than the economic activity of most countries in the world. They've got a AAA credit rating. The United States government does not. They're one of a handful of corporations that has maintained that level of profitability over 50, 60 years. They have a durable, long-term business model that has a very political sort of strategy associated with it. But in terms of their corporate performance, they're also a case of extreme engineering. They're very much led by systems and automation and kind of engineering mindset. And so they bring this very data-driven, scientific, cold, long-term, interest-focused discipline to their work, and it makes them effective.
Mm-hmm. Is Exxon to blame for high gas prices, or are prices, as the company would like to claim, based on international tensions over Iran's nuclear program?
Yeah, I think global oil prices are set in global markets, and the pressures that arise in unstable places, whether Iran or West Africa or Iraq, is what affects traders' expectations. There are other factors as well. Speculation, increasingly, Wall Street speculation, money pouring in an unregulated way onto oil markets causes volatility, causes prices to swing around. I think neither the President of the United States, who sometimes gets blamed for gasoline prices, nor, frankly, the oil companies, who also get blamed because their signs are right there at the gas pump when you fill your tank, can do much to control global prices. But this is the result of a system that the oil companies themselves have lobbied to preserve over a long period of time, a system that is driven by deregulation of markets and doesn't recognize the fact that gasoline really is a kind of utility in our society, just like electric power. We just don't treat it the way we treat electric power.
Well, and Steve, to many people, Exxon is the most hated corporation in the world. Should that be something for investors to care about?
It's an interesting question. I think they know they're hated. They're obviously very smart people. They've got a lot of money. They think about that question, and a lot of the time they just maintain a sort of strategic defensive crouch and tell themselves it doesn't matter. I'm not sure that's right. We live in a world of greater and greater economic integration, and that requires partnerships. They have a reputation for being a poor partner in their industry, arrogant, standoffish, prickly. I think that hurts them. Also, they're very much a science-led company. In order to compete with big state-owned oil companies like China's and Russia's and India's in the next 20 or 30 years, they're going to need to be the very best science organization they can be. And their rigid, closed culture, which has a very poor record of promoting women, for example, which is not marked by diversity or a kind of open environment. I think it's going to be hard for them to recruit and retain the best scientists in the world if they don't open up their windows.
Mm-hmm. No, it's certainly not hurting their stock prices in the near term, as they seem to maintain a pretty high level. But time will tell, and I would actually hope that something like this eventually catches up with any company that acts this obnoxiously, if you will. Steve Coll is president of New America Foundation, staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. He is the author of 7 books, most recently Private Empire, Exxon Mobil, and American Power. Steve, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
And we hope to talk to you again soon. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Dan McWhorter, a computer expert who reveals how China is stealing America's intellectual property.
Now, Bob Cusack, managing editor of The Hill, in studio with us as a friend of Bill this hour. As if there wasn't already enough to worry about here in Washington, D.C., a couple of days ago, a report coming out from a company called Mandiant, located in Alexandria, Virginia, not far from the Capitol. They've been asked to look into the hacking that the New York Times had discovered had been taking place in its computer files. And they released their report that showed that the hacking is not limited to the New York Times. It's a lot broader than we thought, a lot scarier than we thought. Dan McWhorter is a director of the Intel team for Mandiant, managing director, joining us on our newsline this morning. Hey, Dan, thanks for being there.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Let me ask you, first of all, so just give us the kind of the executive summary of how bad this is and who's behind it.
Well, yeah, we've been doing investigations for about 9 years as a company, and for the last 6 years we've investigated and collected data on this group. It's one of 20 groups that we trace back to China origins, amongst other groups that we follow. But in the report, we lay out, 60 pages of detailed findings. It's very data thick and analysis thick. Over 3,000 digital indicators to help detect and find these threat actors. And then in the report, we build up the case for why we believe that this is traced back to the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, inside of China, in particular inside of their 3rd Department, 2nd Bureau, which is a unit we call a unit that is called 61398.
In addition to the New York Times, who else were they targeting? Or who were some of the chief targets?
Well, they've targeted a lot. We found, and again, we've been investigating this for 6 years, so along with other other attacks. But with this group in particular, they've compromised over 141 victims over 6 years that we had visibility into. And what's really interesting is it spanned over 20 different industries. So we had victims from public affairs to construction, aerospace, education, legal, engineering, electronics, IT. The list sort of goes on and on.
Big names, right?
Industries.
I've seen Bloomberg, I've seen Apple, Twitter, Facebook, not just the New York Times or other news organizations too. How about government agencies?
Yeah, there are attack groups that are very focused on government agencies and defense agencies. This group wasn't. They did hit areas like that, but they weren't massively focused on it.
Dan, Bob Cusack with The Hill. As far as Congress has been debating this, as you know, there's been different bills in the House and Senate. Do you think that there's a piece of legislation that would help solve this problem? And what do you think is the motivation, China's motivation in particular?
I'll speak to the motivation question first. I think it's definitely to improve their economic power in the world. You know, they have set a very short timeline to become, a dominant first world country, and in order to do that in such a short period of time, they need their industries to grow rapidly. The other thing to keep in mind is that in a communist country, your separation between industry and government is nearly none.
Right.
They're very overlapped. So the government has a huge interest in providing any type of information they can to industry, any kind of intellectual property, any kind of edge for efficiency that can help make their industries do better in the market. As far as legislation, I think the good news is I think there's a lot of positive momentum. I don't think that legislation alone can solve this problem, but I think anything we can do on the diplomacy side to put pressure on China to not do this is a welcome first step.
Well, I want to ask you again about how serious this is. If they could penetrate, let's say, our electric grid or the air traffic control system, or our transportation system, Amtrak or whatever, could they shut it down?
Sure, and it is very serious. I mean,
sure. Yeah, hello, right. Yeah. So, I mean, this is really, I guess the term cyber warfare is not too strong, is it?
No, and Dutch Ruppersberger, he estimated that in 2012 we lost $300 billion in theft of trade secrets. So even on the financial side, the economic side, which people don't get as freaked out about as when you start talking about critical infrastructure, but even the financial side, losing these trade secrets has massive impact. And it's one of those things that you don't always notice it immediately.
You start noticing about that aspect.
A few years later, that our businesses can't compete as well in the global market because all their intellectual property and R&D has been stolen. But the critical infrastructure piece is obviously very interesting. The same level of access that it takes to steal some documents from a computer, that same level of access, you don't need to have any more power in the computer system. You can delete files, you can corrupt things, you can run malicious software. It's all the same.
In your research, Dan, did you find that China has a lot vested in the United States? If the United States economy takes a hit, they take a hit as well. Are there other people out there, like terrorists, that obviously would want to take down our electric grid, where China may not want that?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about China that people have been asking is how is their motivation different? And there aren't too many other countries that we witness, doing this almost exclusively for financial gain. They've had access to systems that they could have corrupted and attacked and affected critical infrastructure, but they've chose not to. If you had a different organization, like a terrorist organization, they could, theoretically gain the same access. It's really not that difficult. It's easy to play offense, and it's very difficult to play defense. You can find more about this report from Mandiant at their website, Mandiant. We'll have a link on our website too, but just to spell it for you one time, MANDIANT.com. Now, Dan, can we really point fingers at China here when, at least reportedly, the United States used the same kind of system, a worm, to undo Iran's nuclear project? Yeah, I think one thing you have to consider is scope, and then the other one's the intent. And there's lots and lots of governments that hack or do computer network operations for national security reasons, to understand military technologies or motivations and things like that. And of course the government, the U.S. government, does that as well. What's different about China is the scope, the amount. Like in our report, the 141 victims. We're just a small company, 300 people, and yet we had visibility into 141 victims across these 20 industries. And literally, thousands and thousands of files of drawings and plans and R&D research leaving these companies. We don't, and nor do any of our allies that we know of, hack for the benefit of our economy or for the benefit of the industries within our countries.
President Obama, I remember, and Bob, you may too, right? He was first year in office. John Harwood from CNBC was interviewing him, and he said, like, what keeps you up at night? What's the one problem that maybe you hadn't anticipated that keeps you up? And he said cybersecurity, and I went, whoa, I never heard anybody use that word before. But so he's been on this and aware of this for a long time. And I don't know, and Dan, maybe you do, but the president did put forth a program or a plan or some executive action early on to deal with this. Has that had any impact, Dan? Or is there anything?
Say for sure. I mean, we've seen an escalation in attacks over the last 2 years. It could be that we're growing and that we have, as a company, and we have more visibility, as we get more clients. But we've certainly not seen anything decrease over the last, 4, 5, 6 years.
As you know, Dan, China wasn't too happy with your report. What has been the backlash, if there has been any, and has there been any cybersecurity backlash?
There's been very little. We've heard reports from, especially from reporters in China, that they can't access our website or can't download our document. But I don't think that's inconsistent or unexpected.
But they have publicly denied the link to the Chinese military, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's the same rhetoric that they've been saying for years.
And by the way, I have to ask, how did you find them? There's some stories that there was some middleman that you were able to get to who cooperated with you, or, I mean, this may be a state secret. I'm not sure you could tell us, but...
No, basically what we've done is just compiled the data that we've been looking at for the last 6 years. Around December, we said, hey, wouldn't it be interesting? We know this group so well. Our real main concern is, could we still track them if they wanted to continue to do operations? And we felt with this group, we knew them so well, inside and out, in every way, front to back, that we wouldn't lose track of them, so to speak, if they continued to hack, even after we explained what all we knew. It would cause them to have to retool, to re-architect, they would have to go through massive change. So anyways, that's what made us decide to do it.
Right.
So we just took our data that we've had over the last 6 years and some of the analysis we had already started, but they gave us all kinds of great hints. Like, one of the attackers likes to use a password that basically gives up the exact bureau, office, and section that he is inside the PLA. And so, when you translate that over into Chinese, the password that he uses, it translates exactly to which bureau he's in. So that was a good help. There's also two types of victims.
Not the brightest hacker.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right.
There's two types of victims in these things, too. I'll explain real quick just to hit the middleman. There's an end user who's the victim that loses their IP. There's also another type of victim that gets their resources stolen. People use their Internet connection, so it looks like they're the ones launching the attack. So when we get access to their systems, we can watch the attackers launch the attack. And we were able to glean a lot of information from that, including where
I have to say, man, this is a whole new world. And not for you, Dan, but I think for most Americans. Dan McWhorter, thanks so much for your time this morning, Dan. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Bill and Bob.
Managing Director of the Intel team for Mandiant. Again, mandiant.com.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. James K. Galbraith, Steven Coll, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org